Hi, my name is Micha Mazzini, and I will read you a short story called Greed that was published in 2018. And it starts with a quote from country singer Ferling Husky saying, "I've never seen anybody I didn't trust. After all, life is built on faith and trust." Okay, story one. After Peter, I thought things couldn't get worse. I just had to wait, breathe through each day as it came, rain or shine, all kinds of weather and seasons, and by the time the year was through, there would be days when I would no longer think of him so intensely. It makes my teeth grind and strains my neck. I worked a lot and would fall exhausted into bed, drifting instantly, not into sleep, but the drab mush through which I had to wade, unable to tell thoughts from feelings. In the darkest corners of the night, I would wonder which body I would wake into. Indeed, by the beginning of summer, I did feel better and started thinking about the ritual of cleansing my mind of him. A century ago, one might have burned letters and photographs, allowing the smoke to disinfect the nostrils, the stinging in the eyes, the substitute for tears, and to see the consolation in the small pile of ashes. In these digital times, I repeatedly pecked at the Dell key and felt unfulfilled. I decided to tell of Peter's abuse, but who to? All my relationships are either business or ex, so I had to carefully choose among my acquaintances one that I would elevate to the status of friend, a listener with a temperate level of confidentiality. If Eskimos have 200 words for different grades of snow, we should have twice as many for levels of friendship. I ordered the best catering and chose the wine myself. After pouring out the last drops, and we folded our napkins, laid them back on the table, leaned against the backrest, and sighed from our full stomachs, I started talking about Peter and his treachery. She was a sympathetic listener, eyes wide open and eyelids fluttering at the most emotional parts of my story. When I finished, we stared at each other in silence for a long time before she spoke. I watched her, wondering why I could see her mouth moving, hear her words, but the meaning was lost to my brain. When I realized what she was saying, it hurt more than Peter's betrayal. "Oh, how I wish my man would do something like this to me," she said. I let the evening roll on, even though I felt more alone than ever. I observed the body sitting in front of me, its movements, the mouth forming the words, and all I thought about was how this was not only another human being, but another world, one that was entirely incomprehensible to me. There is no greater loneliness than that left behind a story told but not understood. During the sleepless night, I realized I needed to tell it again, to myself this time, very carefully, so I could pinpoint the moment when the friend's understanding and mine diverged. Was it possible we were both right? Can betrayal be a gift and deception the greatest compliment? Second, this is what happened. Last year's summer came early and the choking hot air followed me even on my long walk around the park, all the way to the Japanese tourists laying flowers on Lennon's mandala, all of them looking so young they must have been born after his death. They bowed their heads as I imagined their ancestors paid obeisance to the emperor before leaving an offering of Chinese-made toy teddy bears they brought along in their Chinese-made backpacks. I don't know why, but noticing intercultural misapprehension comforts me a little when my stomach aches. Even though I had not visited the restaurant in a while, the hostess at the welcome counter recognized me immediately and led me to the best table. "The usual?" she asked, and I made a mental note to double her tip. "Just lentil soup, please." I gazed at the empty seat opposite me and I remember the man I let go right here. We are sitting in a vegan restaurant. Why do you have to preach to me about veganism? He interrupted me mid-sentence. Thoughts swarmed as I slowly closed my mouth. How he's overdoing it with the credit card I took out just for him, how he's lying to me, cheating on me, and how the sex wasn't as good as it was in the first few months. He was right. I preached about love for animals because I no longer felt any for him. How actively me must have hated me to dare interrupt the cow he was milking. I finished off my food in silence, paid the bill for both, and kicked him out of my life. The napkin stood up like a pyramid, and the restaurant logo flashed the year I was born in at me. Yes, I thought. I'm 37, and I prefer to entrust my soft spot to alternate jets of cold and warm water than a man's tongue, finger, or penis. It should have sounded pathetic, but didn't. I smiled contentedly. Maybe I've reached an age when I'm just fed up of all these relationships. I turned around to see what had happened to the usually impeccable service, and my shoulder hit the waiter who was just bending over with the bowl of soup. The liquid splashed over my skirt. For a moment, I didn't feel anything, then it started scalding. I wanted to scream, but my upbringing kicked in, so I clenched my teeth, producing a long, deep, whimpering sigh that ended in a groan. The staff went already in full action. Somebody brought ice, the hostess was apologizing, but I could not take my eyes off the face of the waiter. I have never seen greed so bad and so intense. As I left, I saw his face once more, reflected in the glass door. In his dark shirt, he stood leaning on the neon column at the far end of the bar, staring at me. I found his message as I was junking spam on Facebook. I'd once more like to apologize, he wrote, adding in a second message as if he had subsequently realized that I might have forgotten everything about him, which I had done, that he was the waiter with the soup. By then, the message was already 10 days old, and even if my sense of courtesy whispered at me that I should at least reply with a thank you, I decided not to listen. A few days later, he sent me another message inviting me for lunch. As a token of apology, he wrote, the construct so odd it amused me. I checked his photo and his face vividly arose the memory of his greed. Last year, I was paying a therapist who found out nothing new but merely put in more fancy words that I confirmed my ego by maintaining my lovers. And so I'm never really in a relationship because I'm afraid of it, etc., etc. As if I didn't know before that, I'm just a piggy bank, little more than honey for hungry drones. How can I change this? I asked her. On your own, consciously, through actions, she said. I thanked her without further comment and never returned. Another invitation arrived some days later. He added a link to musical file. I'm listening to this right now. I put on my headphones and expected some rhythmical racket. This made me think for the first time how much younger than me he was. The piano started resolutely marching into a kind of hard tenderness. I liked it and I put the play on an auto repeat. Eric Satie, Piece Froid, it said below the flashing visualization. The music stuck inside my head, and as I sat on the terrace above the treetops that hid below them two of the most enduring forms of existence, tourists and joggers, I held a glass of martini and I began humming the tune, but realized that with my imperfect ears I was ruining its beauty, so I stopped. I checked the waiter's Facebook profile and memorized his name, Peter. Most of his posts were pieces of classical music and occasional link to the grant and competition announcement, mostly for young composers. Nothing to bring him many followers. There was a clip of him playing the piano very well for my amateur ears. It stopped abruptly when somebody put a beer bottle on the lid. In group pictures, he always seemed to be standing on the side with the shy smile of an accidental passerby. Within the last year, he had shortened his curly hair and got his first crease between the eyebrows. I guess he had yet to celebrate his 30th birthday. A few days passed before a new invitation with a note on his listening repertoire. It said only "Le Cygne" under the track, and it wasn't from Swan Lake. I checked it immediately. The yearning sound of the cello gave me the goosebumps. I called my secretary and told her to find out who the composer was. I hired the staff, but even she was unable to hide her momentary surprise. It took her about half an hour to send me an email that was from Camille Saint-Saëns, Le Carnaval des Animaux. In vain, I tried to figure out if Peter had some hidden structure to link his messages to what he was listening to, the composer, etc. Driving makes me focus, walking disperses me with the surroundings. I switched off my phone and went for a long drive. I repeatedly listened to both compositions Peter had sent, probably priming my thoughts for the outcome I would reach. I live in the epicenter of the slim and elegant. Driving towards the outskirts of the city means seeing more and more flap and cheaper fabric covering it. The world has already fallen apart, and those who have given up stand in front of shops and at bus stops without meaning and purpose. Sisyphus at least had a rock and a task. Highway 90 runs through an endless land of malls and hospitals. Funeral parlors are hidden, and the only cemeteries left are historical monuments. Industrial buildings are long empty, covered in danger of collapse, keep out signs. Shopping and medical care are the only remaining public activities. Suddenly, it struck me with a clarity I didn't know I was capable of. I buy everything. This car, the petrol, road tolls, the audio system, everything. I saw my life in a different light that also shone on the surrounding I was driving through. These were not just malls and hospitals, but stores for objects and stores for cures. Nothing is free. We pay for everything, including the therapist advice and the shower and hot water it gushes to give me satisfaction. I remembered an acquaintance who financially provided for herself by greeting with her ex-husband about access to the children during weekends. She simply sent him an email with a price list for daily hire, extra hours, and discount for longer time spans. I focused on the idea forming vividly in my mind. It seemed so logical, I wondered why I hadn't thought of it before. If we buy and sell everything, why had I tried to keep my life out of the common rule? If I see myself as an exception, no wonder I feel cheated and hurt when I'm being robbed. I should reconcile myself to my next lover being simply an employee, manage him as a separate cost venture with a budget, and make sure to limit its deficit and need for amending. Music for me is Peter's weight on the chair, and his embarrassment amused me. I felt older in the only positive meaning of the word, wiser. He was sacked from the vegan restaurant after the incident with the soup, and I expected he would ask me to intervene. He didn't. He had already found another job in a diner selling hamburgers for such exuberant prices that they simply had to become a fad, or the customers would be declared insane. I'm not vegan, he blushingly admitted, and I laughed for the first time. He insisted on paying for lunch, and I allowed him to start the game by losing small stakes, meaning he wanted to achieve big results. I value people who pass the marshmallow test. At this point in the story, the friend interrupted me for the first time. What if he wasn't with you just out of greed? You didn't see his face when he poured that soup over me, I replied. That first expression of his hovered between us through all of our meetings with Peter, and nothing he did or said could make it go away entirely. My previous lover was French banker, a man of one book, a manual on how to charm women, and he strictly stuck to it, punctuation included. So he was not gifted anatomically, He was at least attention and amusing with his old-fashioned manners, probably also because I knew it wouldn't last. Had this been some other century, and had I realized he was the man I was stuck with until death, I'd have rather given him poison than myself. When I invited him to my apartment for the first time and his speech was still flowery, I calmly said, "Fuck me," just to amuse myself and seeing the shock on his face. When he started carefully dropping hints about top opening at a bank where I had some power over the executive committee, I dropped him. The only permanent thing he left behind was the thought that first made me notice him. In this country, we use air conditioning to increase the difference between the inside of the building and the outside, between the man-made environment and nature, while in Europe they try to even it. I thought he was clever, but he was just always cold. Peter was intellectually at my level, but he opened up an entirely new world for me. His interest in sounds turned my focus to things I was so used to, I no longer noticed them. How does the sound of a full glass put on the table differ from that of an empty one, or half full? Full of milk, water, juice, or molasses? How sounds combine and how we can miss them entirely if we don't perceive them as dangerous. I see how his face distorts when an ambulance rushes by, not out of empathy for the poor thought inside, but because of the penetrating vulgarity of the sound that so many people don't even hear. Occasionally, his focus drifted away as I talked, and when I once replaced my words with la la las, it took him a while to notice. He apologized. "Your voice has a special timbre, a color so unusual I've never heard before. I love to listen to it." It was the first time in my life I received a compliment I couldn't check in the mirror or in my bank account. I became even better at business meetings. I stopped listening to the content and concentrated on the prosody of sentences. The content was sent to me in spreadsheets anyway. Peter alerted me to the streams of the oceans of sound we swim in without noticing because we were born into it. He plucked at the piece, making it audible, changing and combining it until it became part of his composition he wanted to play to me. He invited me round to his place, saying his roommate could be out all evening. I sat on the cheapest IKEA chair, and as I observed him setting up the keyboards, I thought to myself, "Oh, this will be boring," and started sliding my finger towards the phone in my handbag to send my secretary the signal to call me for an urgent meeting. Peter put his hands on the keys and pressed them slowly. Despite his young age, the roommate supported an encouraging beer belly and was holding 2 six-packs to feed it. "Oh, sorry," he said, "you're still here." Peter and I turned our heads to the clock on the wall and then looked at each other, shocked at how the music has wiped away time. I called my masseuse and told her it was urgent. She had to work really hard to rid of my stiff arse of that IKEA sensation. The slice of pizza lay on the table, and I observed it like an exotic specimen of an animal I'd read about and seen it in films, but was not entirely sure was harmless. "I'm sorry. It's all I can afford right now," Peter said. It was his turn, and he insisted on paying, so our dinners fluctuated between the best culinary offerings and the absolute minimum you need to pay to be fed. A vicious lump of melted cheese kept me silent while he talked about a call for application from a young composer under the age of 35, and how he was preparing a suite for voice and orchestra. "Orchestra," interrupted him. "That must be expensive." "Of course, but I don't need one. I can compose everything on my synth and prepare the notation on my computer. If I win, a real orchestra will play my piece and I'll get to conduct it." He stared upwards to the neon lamp and forgot to close his mouth. Daydreaming was making him fragile, and I felt anxious. A loud voice from deep inside was trying to reach my vocal cords. "You want an orchestra? Here you are." I was about to patronizingly pat his shoulder. I barely stopped myself and took another bite at the pizza. An unknown feeling rumbles through me and I ground my teeth. He was so devoted to music, he sometimes appeared almost autistic. Once he mentioned that he regretted the hours he spent at work when he could be composing. At that moment, it occurred to me that he had never asked me to help for his rent. He never whined or complained and went about his job as a saint suffering for his art. I went to the new place he worked and ordered a vegan burger. He worked enthusiastically but forgot all about his job the moment his shift was over. He didn't just hang up his overalls, he switched channels. Not even once he mentioned his customers, and when I expressly asked him, he went into deep thought as if trying to reach someone inside him and waiting for the connection. He eventually went on to tell me about an older man whose shoes squeaked in the manner of Arvo Pärt's Symphony No. 2. He wanted to get me into bed as soon as possible. He blushed when he couldn't take his eyes off my cleavage, enhanced by a push-up bra. I caught his gaze on my ass every time I turned and occasionally noticed a suspicious bulge in his jeans as he stood up from the table. I wonder whether that initial expression of greed on his face was in fact a lust for my body, but immediately repudiated the idea. The world is not that simple, and as I hold at least some of the tiny wheels that make it go round in my hands, I should have no better. In retrospect, I wonder whether the scene that followed was born of the frustration of being unable to read his ultimate intentions. Whatever the case, I wish I could just erase it. This, of course means I will remember it forever. I asked him straight out, "What is it you want from me?" He stared at me perplexed. "My pussy," I said, and winced inside. "Watch out. This is the second time you're being vulgar this year." He blushed again and looked as if he was about to cry. He remained silent for a long time, his head bowed. I felt the blood of shame nesting in my cheeks. "I'm sorry," I added tenderly. He looked at me. Anger was replacing sadness. "All men are not the same," he said. "Some of us want more." I couldn't climax for the first 2 weeks. Physically, he was endowed well above average and his movements focused on my pleasure. But every time my eyes dimmed and tiny lights started blinking, coming nearer, I recalled Peter's greedy face from our first encounter and sobered up. It made him concerned and his erection started deflating. We sat on the bench in the park and I asked him how his suite is coming along. Only months left to the deadline. And nothing. I'm stuck. The sadness in his eyes almost made me hug him. I went for a long walk. Beyond the bridge to the other side of town towards the remains of industry and onto the area that was becoming fashionable. Summer shone on the horizon, handing the world over to autumn. Developers had bought up the plots I was walking past with loans and took out further loans to build. Tenants and companies took out loans to move in. With further loans, they opened shops, pubs, and cafes and set their prices high to pay it all back. Customers are taking out loans to keep up with this standard of living. How could I, right at the center of this blooming arrangement, with all these loans like petals around me, not get rich? As our new politician would say, I started from zero. My father gave me just $1 million. If I was born into privilege and the world is split between the few of us and the rest of them, why did I always imagine a bloody revolution with hordes coming to get us? Why would some of them not try nicely? Why can't I just hire a damn orchestra for this poor guy Peter and give a chance to his music, which I can't judge but find magical? Let him practice conducting it now and win the award of this shitty foundation that My thought stopped abruptly in a shocked realization. When I forced myself to breathe in, it sounded like deep spasm from the stomach. The foundation. I was on its board. So that's the deal with Peter. A young and talented composer wants to win and is selling what he has. I laughed with relief. For a moment, I thought about how hopelessly clumsily he set about his business. I was not even a judge, just a sponsor. On the other hand, what can a man without contact and connection do but grab the first straw that flows in his direction? Waiter, there's a desperate straw floating in my soup, I shouted out loud, and a woman in pink jogging gear jumped with surprise. I called taxi and returned home. That evening I climaxed so intensely I almost fainted. October passed in a work and sex. Every second night Peter came to my place, and in the morning the concierge let him out of the shielded world. It is said that the now long dead architect of our building has a student staked an area around his desk with velvet rope to prevent other students coming near. He used the same idea for his buildings and received many orders from people sharing his wish who could afford to finance it. Peter wanted to be with me every night, but I set the limit straight away. Our work could not suffer. I didn't have to ask how the suite was coming along. His bright eyes reported the progress clearly. He often sent me a small piece from it, whetting my appetite for beauty, too short to satiate it. I wanted to hear the entire piece, but he remained mysterious. If I win, you will hear it. If not, it's not worth hearing anyway. I waited for him to ask for my intervention, and at the end of October, I mentioned the foundation myself. He let the queue pass by. We didn't see each other in the last week before the deadline. He had to finish his work, and I surprised myself by missing him, at least missing what was I called my internal monologue with him, listening to the sounds and the music he sent, almost obsessively replaying Satie and his cold rooms. Twice I wanted to call the head of the foundation, but stopped myself. I hate it when people don't stick to the rules of the game. Peter should ask himself. I could see the surprise in my secretary's eyes every time she called me daydreaming about Peter, finally asking for my help with me, making sure he gets the award, the first step in a brilliant career. I don't brag about him. He cut contact after he wins. He doesn't need me anymore, but at the occasional parting conversation over dew-covered champagne glass, I hinted being the one who has made him a star. In November, he checked his emails even during our nights, as if the old men at the foundation were likely to spend the nights notifying winners. For the first time, he called me during a meeting, and I needed a second to remember who he was and that I had a life outside the bank as well. He mumbled and stuttered for so long I got worried. Then he finally told me that he had won and invited me to the concert. I stopped orgasmic again, and I saw less and less of Peter. I had to work at night to compensate for hours lost during the day due to going for checkups. I got the first result, asked for a second opinion, and third, all in vain. Everyone kept saying that the sensation of pressure and sometimes pain inside my chest was not cancer, but psychosomatic symptoms, a term used these days for an ill-famed hysteria. I now know that I was just using work as pretext not to meet up with him. If my initial analysis was wrong and Peter was not with me for the award, what was it he wanted? Nobody ever asked what men want because everybody knows it's money and sex, in one packet if possible. If I was just a vessel for useful testosterone, it was good for me too, but it was degrading. All this courting, the four love emails and talk, just for the sex without business gain? Had I really judged Peter so wrongly? Was I still capable for leading positions? Even now, in my half sleep, I occasionally recall that feeling. Hovering without control, an inch above pulsating mass, waiting to fall, preparing to sleep, not knowing where. Peter preserved with his love letters, sending me beautiful music and asking me what was wrong. The more I wanted him, the more I avoided him. His big sad eyes pinned me like a butterfly into a glass case as I repeated my lies about my workload, and I started finding it tedious, repeatedly assuring him that I would make it to the concert. I have a gift for you, he kept saying. I broke my own rules and offered to buy him a suit for the concert. You said you have a gift for me, so it must be all right if I give you one too. After much hesitation, he finally consented. As he tried it on in my favorite boutique, he smiled at himself in the mirror as if he was looking at the man he has always wanted to be and never dared become. When the stylist, as they are called in such places, helped him remove the jacket, Peter asked him the price. The poor man fidgeted, looked to me for help, and in the end whispered the amount. The Adam's apple on Peter's neck traveling slowly and painfully up and down before he threw the suit aside as if he were contaminated. With a money like that, I could live for a year. 2 even, he exclaimed and ran out into Fifth Avenue. He stepped into the stage in something he had bought with his own savings, and it showed. I had to admit he had planned it wisely. Young artists have to dress shoddily. The audiences expect and even want it. He bowed to the polite applause, looked at me, forcibly became serious, and stepped onto the podium. The first violin started hesitantly, barely audibly. I began wondering where the singer was, and then the music embraced me and I closed my eyes. The introduction gave way to the further sentences before, out of short silence, a female voice was born. Little more than a breath, deep and quivering. I opened my eyes expecting to see a figure on stage, but there was none. The voice was coming from the speakers. Peter swayed his head like seaweed in a strong current. The voice started crumbling, fluctuating higher and lower. The orchestra changed its rhythm, interrupted his outburst of cacophony. The voice floated across the hall, and it was me. My heart stopped and I had to drop into a crouch before it got going again. It was me. My voice, my breathing, the sounds I make during an orgasm. The suite was coming to its climax. That worked. The lights about us started blinking exactly as I had described my orgasm to Peter, or were the lights surely barely a part of my imagination? My heart felt like it was pounding in my cheeks and my muscles hurt from clasping onto the seat. I was right. It was greed I saw on his face when I first met him. He poured the soup on me and I cried out in pain, but he wasn't interested in me, but my voice. Like every sound in his surrounding, he analyzed it and decided what he needed it for his composition. But it was my voice, so if he wanted to have it, he had to have me first. He needed me for his suite, for the award, for his career. I felt as if my insides were being shredded with a pair of scissors, and I had to constrain my throat not to throw up the pieces they were leaving behind. During the standing ovation, I ran away with my head low. In the glass doors, I could see Peter's reflection as he stood in the stage, sweaty and happy, staring at my back. He called and wrote messages asking what was wrong. I could have scratched his greedy face to the skull and spit on it. I was so mad at him. I told him how I saw it. He had stolen my voice at my most intimate moments when I'm entirely myself, and stole it for his own career. He responded with a long email, sounding baffled. I had won his attention with my voice, but after that he had fallen in love. Would it have been different if he had first noticed my breast or my ass? Like writers taking words and stories from people they meet, he takes sounds. My voice at those moments, he wrote, was so special, so unique that he could not allow it to pass, to disappear, die with me, but live forever in music. Everybody was asking him who it belonged to, and he was not disclosing its source. That decision was mine. I blocked his email and phone. Whenever he tried to reach me, I ignored him. 3. A year of getting over his betrayal later, and I'm back at the start. Maybe I chose the wrong friend. Was it possible that Peter wasn't stealing me, but giving me the ultimate gift, at the same time achieving everything he wanted, success and a career? Was I no more than a small element he picked up because he needed it, or was I his inspiration, his muse, as he kept calling me in his emails? If, as he says, he was acting out of love. What then really is love? Is it not, in the best of cases, just a mixture of mutual benefits trading to his body and mind? There is an envelope in front of me with a single ticket sticking out of it. It's slightly torn, but I stopped myself in time. I don't know what to do. Should I go?